Welcome, everyone. As the fleet management industry continues to grow and evolve, we're at a unique crossroad where experience meets innovation. Today, we're here to honor and learn from the true legends of our field, those whose wisdom and resilience have shaped the industry that we know today. I'm Lauren Fletcher, Vice President of Content at Bobbit, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar, Fleet Legends, Capturing Wisdom to Guide the Next Generation, sponsored by Legend Fleet Solutions. It's an exciting moment as this webinar also launches our new Fleet Legends video interview series, a project very close to my heart that will bring the insights, practical tips, and historical perspectives of seasoned fleet managers to a new generation of leaders. This series is our way of preserving the invaluable lessons that are making fleet management a thriving and forward-thinking industry. Throughout today's discussion, we're going to dive into timeless advice, actionable strategies, and personal stories that have defined our panelists' careers. This knowledge isn't just for today, it's guidance that you can carry with you into the future. We encourage you to participate by submitting questions, and if we don't get to yours during the session, we'll make sure to follow up afterward. Now, let's meet our esteemed panelists, Glenn Yamada, Bob Stanton, Pete Silva, and Matthew Betts. To kick things off, I want to hear from each of you about your background and journey in fleet so far and help our audience get to know you guys a little bit better. So, Glenn, let's start with you. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, Lauren, I started my career as a mechanic, automotive mechanic, and moved up in the early 80s to become a fleet mechanic, repairing trucks and forklifts, and so on and so forth, moved my way up. And I joined Hawaii Gas in 2003 as a garage foreman. Then I moved up to the supervisory position, and then now I do all the hard work of specing trucks, ordering trucks, and to me, that's worse than fixing them.
Thank you, Glenn. And Bob, what about you?
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you to all the veterans on this call. I began my career as a branch manager trainee in 1977 in the private sector. I spent the first 18 years of my career in the private sector, and then transitioned to government in 1992. And retired from government fleet roughly 10 years ago. And I've been in the consulting world since then. Really enjoyed this business and anxious to share some information with everyone on the call.
Thanks, Bob. And Pete, what about you?
Thank you, Lauren. So I spent 32 years at PepsiCo. The last 16 of those, I was either running fleet operations at Frito-Lay or fleet procurement for PepsiCo, and retired the first time in 2014, then got bored and then went and ran Aramark's fleet for a couple of years, and then moved on to National Express, the second largest school bus company in the US, and retired again in 2019. And when I'm not traveling around the country in my motorhome, I'm doing some part-time consulting still these days. So primarily on environmental and procurement issues. So that's who I am.
Glad to still have you around. And Matthew, what about you? Last but not least.
Well, Lauren, thanks for hosting this. I actually last year celebrated 50 years in fleet, started right out of school, worked a little bit for Budget Rent-A-Car, and then got into some sales roles. So spent most of my time in fleet sales. The longest period, 18 years of that, I was the major fleet sales guy for Wheels in the Midwest. Then did get in the last 5 years of my career. I did work in the fleet department for DTE, who is the electric company here in the Detroit area. I was charged at first with implementing a fleet management program. They had never used an FMC before, and then transitioned into running the EV program, so putting electric vehicles and chargers in the DTE fleet. Retired in March when they offered an early retirement program and started Oar Creek Fleet Consulting. I don't do the type of consulting that these other guys do. They do the hard stuff. I do more fleet introductions. So introducing companies that are new as suppliers to fleet to companies that I know in the fleet area that might need their services. Been very involved in the industry. I am the current past president of AFLA. And just this past September, during AFLA, got inducted into the Automotive Fleet Hall of Fame. So been around for a couple of years.
Congrats. All right. So now that we've set up why I chose you four to join us for this call, let's go ahead and get right on into it. So in the past 18 years that I've been involved, I've seen the fleet industry undergo some incredible transformations, and you guys put my time almost to shame. So what are some of the significant changes that you've seen in the fleet management industry during your careers? And are there any memorable experiences or challenges during that time that you've kind of faced and overcame? Bob, let's start with you. What are some of those significant changes that you've seen since you started?
Well, the cool thing that I've seen in this industry is how much more professional the management team, and this is really at all levels, has become. When I began in this business, the fleet manager was oftentimes the number one mechanic, the top mechanic. And Glenn, I'm not throwing any shade your way. I don't mean to do that. But, you know, it was sort of an evolutionary process where the mechanic got to be the lead guy, and then he became, you know, sort of by default the fleet manager, which in some cases was good, some cases was not. And now you don't really see much of that anymore. Most of it comes from guys and gals who are professional management and have skills in that area, which is something our industry has really needed. And I think that I'm really excited about the quality of management at all levels that's occurring on the shop floor. And it's really been fun for me to watch.
And what about, I mean, it's probably hard to pinpoint, but what about a memorable experience or challenge since you started in your career that really stands out to you, and how you kind of worked with that?
Well, when I joined my first public sector fleet in 1992, the fleet at that time had made some really kind of strange decisions. They bought 20 Cat 12G motor graders. And so when I joined the fleet, all of them were coming on 20 years old. And so it's hard to replace 20 motor graders at once. And they did the same thing with fire tankers. They bought over 25 tankers for their fire department. And so this is back in the 80s. So when I come along in the 90s, they're all ready for replacement as well. And you just don't replace vehicles and equipment in that way, but they had done that. And so it was a challenge for me to sort of spread out and manage the downtime over the next 5, 6, 8 years to inform them and educate them on the best way to buy equipment and how to spread those asset buys out in a way that is fiscally responsible. So that was one of the first challenges that I had. And I want to share one other story. They had a Fiat Alice motor grader that had been in the shop for 6 months, and they couldn't find a heat exchanger for it. And so without going through a lot of detail, the internet was just becoming a useful tool. And so I went to the high school next door, and I had a kid translate an English into Portuguese on what I was looking for and put it out on the internet. And sure enough, not Fiat Alice didn't get with me, but their freight forwarder did from Sao Paulo, and they happened to have 2 of them, so I bought them both. And so a week later, we put that motor grader back to work, and the public works director, he thought I performed a magic trick. He had no idea how that worked. And it gave me a lot of cachet early on in my career in the public sector, just by doing what we all do today normally.
Yeah, it's almost literal. I mean, they say trial by fire, but when you have to replace so many fire trucks, I mean, that was quite literally trial by fire for you starting off your career on that point. That's insane. Pete, what about you? What are some of the significant changes that you've seen in fleet management during your career?
Goodness. So I'll build on Bob's comment a little bit in that, this has always historically been a very white male dominated industry. And I can tell you that the level of diversity and the level of improved leadership that we now have today because of the level of diversity and the women in fleet that are really, really sharp cookies out there, that I think the whole industry has become better through diversity. And that would be my encouragement to anybody can be a fleet manager today. I don't know if I could have said that 30 or 40 years ago. I think because of the closedness-minded nature of the industry. The other thing, I think from a memorable experience standpoint, I would think that it's, we had, when I was at Frito at PepsiCo, we started doing electric vehicles before it was really sexy to do electric vehicles. And we hitched our wagon to the wrong horse and ended up with a bunch of obsolete electric trucks way back in, I think it was early 2011 or so. But it was a complete learning experience through the whole industry. And I would tell you that that's probably one of the most significant challenges I've seen over the last 10, 15 years, is how to integrate all this new technology and make it successful. Back when I was a young fleet dude, it was about hybrid trucks, and hybrid trucks was a real sexy thing to go do. And today, the technology and the capability and trying to make it work economically and trying to make it work from a delivery standpoint, because I was primarily involved in delivery fleets, trying to make all that work is, I think, a very big challenge for folks these days. So I'll pass it back, Lauren.
No, I love it. Matthew, what about you? What changes have you seen in the industry that have been significant?
There have been a lot, in a half a century. When you think about it in those terms, a lot changes. And I agree with both Bob and Pete that personnel changes are a big one. I think the other big change has been in technology. So I go back far enough that I can remember when email first came out, and the company I worked for actually made it optional. So it created some real communication challenges, because people were adopting that technology at a different pace. Today, I don't think that we have that luxury, right? Technology is coming at us so fast, data is coming at us so fast that you have to be very adaptable if you're going to be successful today and take advantage of as much of the technology as you can. For a memorable challenge, I'm going to go in a little bit different direction. Because I think there are probably some vendors and salespeople on the call too. Back in the sort of mid 80s, I guess, when not many government fleets were leasing their fleets at all or outsourcing much of their work, I met the folks that ran the fleet for the state of Michigan. This was when I worked for Wheels. And just in talking to them through industry functions, we sort of came to the conclusion that there really wasn't any reason why a state like the state of Michigan wouldn't take advantage of a lease and have some of the same benefits that corporate fleets did. That was met, as you might guess, by some concern on both the customer side and also on on Wheels side, right? Wheels prided themselves in being a value provider. They weren't a low-cost provider. I actually had the CFO at the time of the company tell me we would do that deal over his dead body because, he was just so convinced that they couldn't be a good customer. I didn't check today, but I can tell you that's, over 30 years ago. And I believe the state of Michigan still leases their fleet from Wheels. They have proven to be a real value buyer and a great customer for Wheels. And so the real lesson there, I think, is to try new things, especially if you're a young salesperson and you find a potential customer that is open to new ideas, and stick with it. Right? Don't let the naysayers cut you short if you are convinced that it's a great idea. And I hope that there's going to be new opportunities today that are very similar, and I hope people will stick with it and go after those opportunities.
I love that real world story. Thank you so, so much. Glenn, what about you? What have been some of the significant changes that you've seen in fleet management during your career?
Well, to reiterate what Matt said, technology is one thing, and how it's being applied to the vehicles, and all these legislations that affect us, because our company is considered a motor vehicle fuel provider. So we're regulated by the Department of Energy now, and they dictate what kind of vehicles we can buy and what we cannot buy. Otherwise, we'll be subject to a fine or a penalty. So it's a lot of technology and legislation that comes across and changes all the time that, you just need to be aware of. And another thing is all the availability of safety devices for the vehicles now, because safety has become a #1 priority, especially in our company, that, I just have to keep my eyes open, what's available, and test it out, make sure it works before I go full blast and replace the whole fleet with that equipment. But it's basically the same route. I agree with Matt, technology, and you have to be able to adapt, which he's correct about.
What about a memorable experience that you can recall from your career? Anything that really stands out to you?
Let me look at my
Glenn?
notes.
Oh.
Well, the memory is just, I just have to keep studying to keep up with the new technology in the vehicles, and so at least I have some knowledge of it, and nobody can, pull a fast one on me. But that's my memorable thing is I still have to study.
Yep, every day. And I think honestly, that really leads me quite well into my next question. So fleet management is absolutely a career of constant learning. I think that's what helps keep me in a job, is writing and helping educate and teach everything that we can do. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned in fleet management that you believe are really crucial for our newer industry members to understand? Pete, I want to start with you on this one. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I used to see a lot of new fleet managers when they're working with their suppliers. They would really not. They would really try to bully suppliers, and I never saw success. I rarely saw success, and I think what you learn early on is your suppliers can be a real asset to you and be really important to help you get the things done that you need to get done. And if you create an adversarial relationship with them, they're not going to work as hard as they can to help make you successful. And so I think creating these, and call them win-win relationships that you develop with suppliers and you build, and we were pretty darn good at building long-term relationships with suppliers that helped us, and they helped us, and they went beyond the call of duty to help make both of us successful. Because if somebody's winning and somebody's losing, the relationship won't last very long. And I thought that was pretty important.
Yeah, no, reciprocity. I was just actually on a panel recently at Work Truck Solutions, having to say that word quite a few times, but I think it's so valuable in our industry in so many different ways that it does need to go both ways. You have to be able to have that reciprocal relationship when you're in fleet. Let's see. Matthew, what about you? What are some of those important lessons that you learned?
Yeah, well, very similar to Pete in that I think networking, building partnerships, getting to know people, whether you're the fleet and it's your vendor or vice versa. There's an old saying that people do business with people they like. And I tend to believe that, but I think more true is people do business with people they trust. And if somebody is going to trust you, they have to know who you are. And so, networking events become very important. Letting people know a little bit about you. You all know, I don't know if the audience does, but I do a lot of work with my daughter, Allison, now. She's at a lot of fleet events. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to her, "Oh, you're Allie. I feel like I know you already because your dad talked about you so much over the years." And that was intentional. I mean, it's sort of who I am. I just am proud of my family and want to talk about them. But I always had that in the back of my mind, that if people are going to trust me and want to do business, they have to know who I am, not just who my company is that I represent. And so I hope that people will continue to network and get to know each other as a basis of doing good business together.
That is fantastic advice. Glenn, what about you? What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned?
Well, I tend to agree with Matt and Pete about networking and making connections, because over my years, it's helped me quite a lot. And through all that, I made some real good friends like Matt, through all these networking events. And to say, everything, or who builds what, or what do they offer, you never know all of it until you start networking and talking to people. And the trust, I've been ordering Kenworth trucks from this dealer because this other dealer left me flat, and he went out to bat for me and took care of a big warranty issue. And after that, I've been just dealing with him all the time. But it's very important, I think, in this fleet industry. And never stop networking, because you never know what you'll find or learn. I'm still learning about different upfitters and stuff. But if I didn't network, I couldn't have found most of them. So it's been a real helpful thing. And I would suggest the younger people start, building relationships with the vendors, and you never know when it'll come in handy.
Networking and kindness. I think those are two really, really important threads through all of that. Bob, what about you? What are some of those important lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, I agree with all three of you. I believe that the vendor relationships, and from a government fleet standpoint especially, they frown on that. But frankly, Matt, what you said is really true, that if a vendor knows you and you trust that vendor, you're going to find a way to do business with that vendor. And that's so key. But the lesson, I think the most important lesson that I learned is not to take it personally. It isn't personal, it's just business. And the stakeholders around you, they all have something to offer. They're all subject matter experts in their field, and shame on you if you don't take advantage of their knowledge and expertise that's around you every day. And I think that's really, really important, and something that I learned, unfortunately, later in my career, but did give me a certain level of success and cachet that I wish I had learned earlier. So if you're a new fleet manager, you've got subject matter experts all around, and utilize those people and strive to form partnerships, not just vendor relationships, but partnerships with your vendor. Believe me, it'll pay off in the long run.
Yeah. And I mean, our industry is one that is absolutely known for sharing information. I think, you look at this panel right here where I was able to find you guys more than willing to sit and participate in sharing your experiences. It's just a phone call or a quick email away. Probably no longer optional email away, but an email away for sure. Bob.
Yeah, one of the other things that I did when I first came into government, I didn't understand government accounting very well. I'd come out of the private sector, and governments handle cash a lot differently. And so for the first 6 months, I spent a day a month at the fleet of some of my peers in Florida. And that was so valuable for me because I came away after 6 months with a real mission and goal of how to excel in this field. And you mentioned it, Lauren, about sharing. That's what brought this up. It was so important for me to just shadow another fleet manager just for one day a month over a 6-month period, 6 different fleets, and I learned so much. So if you're new in the industry and you want to learn from your peers, they've got a lot to teach, and I'm sure going to be more than willing to help you.
That's a fantastic recommendation. I love that. The day in the life of others that are in the same position that you're in, learning from that. That's fantastic. So whether it's a wish we actually want to ask for or not, if you could go back in time to when you first started your career, what's one thing you wish you had known right from the start that would have really helped move things along, maybe solve some of those challenges? One thing that would have helped you out. Glenn, I'd love to hear your thoughts here.
Well, I thought about it, and I guess the hardest thing for me to accept is the new generation of workers we have and how the work ethics are different from what I was born and raised to, and brought up with. But I'm still having to learn and adapt, because it has to be somehow a two-way street. But if I knew it would be this hard, then I might have taken a different career.
Yeah, we think that, but we still kind of seem to never go away. We're in it forever. Was it falling into fleet for sure? Love it. Bob, what about you? What's a wish that you wish you had known from the start?
I wish I'd been more humble. I wish I had not tried to be the smartest guy in the room when I wasn't. So humility was a thing that I've learned over time, and it's a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner.
Pete, what about you?
I think I go along the same people route with. I think I underestimated the value of keeping good mechanics, and when you've got somebody that is working their tail off for you and they decide to go somewhere else, then something's failing in your process. And I think attracting and retaining good mechanics, I just wish I would have put more emphasis on that over time. I mean, we had a lot of mechanics in our organizations, and so I underestimated the value of that.
And Matthew, what about you?
Mine is a tie-in to the last question a little bit, and that is I wish I had realized the value of volunteering within the industry, sharing knowledge through, teaching courses in the different industry organizations, and just being present. So, I know it can go too far in that direction. I remember counting up the weekends I was away from home due to industry organization volunteer events, and it was like 8 weekends one year before the family started putting their foot down a little bit. But you have to be there. You have to be visible. As you go along and get a little bit older, you feel compelled to give back to the industry that has been good to you. And that not only pertains to industry organizations, but also attending things like Work Truck Exchange that Bobbitt does so well, or other Bobbitt events, and just, participating, I guess, in the industry, not just as a job, but as a career and as part of your life.
That's fantastic. For anybody that's joined us since the call started, I just want to remind you, we do have the ability to answer some additional questions. I have a ton to keep these guys going through our hour together, but if you guys have any questions, we'd love to be able to answer them. Make sure you drop them in our chat portal below. All right, so what about pitfalls? No industry is without them. Are there any common mistakes that you've observed that you'd advise new fleet managers to avoid? Matthew, let's go back to you on this one. What about you?
Well, I guess the flip side of some of the things we've already talked about, but one in particular, I think for fleet managers that I've noticed over the years, and that is, we have a lot of really great, knowledgeable fleet managers, and we either know the right thing to do based on fleet or we know how to get to the answer. But sometimes we get so focused on the right fleet answer that we ignore some other inputs that are important. So, for instance, you may use all of your fleet knowledge and do a life cycle cost analysis and figure out that Model A is the cheapest, best vehicle that meets the needs of your fleet. But if you don't take into account that providing a nice company car is part of the HR package that your company offers to attract new salespeople, you might come up with the wrong answer, or your answer might not be as well aligned with your company's answer as they would like it to be. So I would say, keep being good, smart fleet managers, but also make sure that what we're doing in fleet aligns with our organizational goals as well.
That's a great tip. Pete, what about you? What are some of the common mistakes that you've observed?
I think early on in my career, I used to see a lot of emotion-based decision-making where people would, they'd have a relationship with a vendor and they wouldn't want to change from that vendor, and they wouldn't really have the facts that led to whatever decision you had to make. And I think I've seen people make emotion-based decisions versus data-based decisions. And I think it's really important that fleets have good data, and you use that data, and data is on your side all the time. Emotions are not in many instances. And so I think it's really important to separate an attraction for a certain thing with emotion versus I can prove that this is the right thing for our fleet because I got the data that shows it. And I think in today's day and age, there's so much good data out there that folks can leverage. And if you don't have that, that's what I'd be working towards, is getting the right data to manage your fleet. So.
And as you know, there is so much of it for every aspect of what you're doing. I think if you can't find the data that you need, there's also people out there that can help you figure that out. Make sure you're leaning and networking on your partners and peers. All right, Bob, what about you? What are some of the pitfall or mistakes that you've kind of seen folks making?
What I've seen commonly in our industry is fleet managers allow decisions or allow events of the day to happen to them rather than them directing those actions. And I think it's very important for fleet managers, regardless of the company, that whether it's a public or private sector company, a fleet manager needs to have a seat at the table. He needs to be one of the key decision makers for the company. And really the only way that a company can recognize the value of fleet is if we as fleet managers communicate our value to them rather than expecting them to come to us. And I see that mistake made over and over again by fleets. They do a great job, but their companies don't know about it. And so they need to be proactive in communicating the value that they bring to the organization in a way that that elevates their the cachet they have in the organization. Because most people, everyone thinks they're a fleet manager. I've got a car in the garage, so I'm a fleet manager. I know all I need to know about fleet because I happen to own a pickup truck. And I ran into that. I run into that constantly, even now, where fleets don't recognize that people that they deal with think they already know what there is to know about fleet, or all there is to know. And by communicating the issues and how you're solving those issues outwardly from fleet to the organization will elevate the amount of appreciation that the organization has for you and your function. And I think that's so critical.
Stand up for yourself. Absolutely. There is an expertise and a skill that is required to do our jobs. And I think if you can enunciate it, like you said, and make sure people are aware of that, that's going to go a long way in furthering your career and fleet management as a profession in general.
Yes.
Glenn, what about you? What are some of the mistakes that you've observed?
Well, just one mistake is just being complacent and not keeping your ear to the ground and being aware of all the changes that goes on in your company, like how your crews are working, whether they change their work style, whether their replacement vehicle would have to be modified to accommodate their new work style, or you can't just leave it status quo from 20 years ago. So you always have to keep your ear to the ground and, notice what changes are going on and how you can help them be more productive. And like Bob said, fleet managers kind of a underestimated job, and it's not really recognized for the value they bring to the company. But it'll take some work, but I would suggest the newer people that bring it to their executive management attention, how important and how much fleet can do to maintain operating costs or control operating costs. But it's something I don't think it's really realized the value.
Bob, did you have something to add on to that one?
Well, I think we sometimes at fleet, we get sort of caught up in the minutia of our business. And so, we think we're in the parts business or the fuel business or the repair business or the administration business or procurement, when really we're in the confidence business. Our customers, whoever they are, our clients, expect when that key is turned that the vehicle's going to start. When they pull up to the fuel island, there's going to be fuel in the tanks. We're really in the confidence business. And I think that's something that everyone in fleet should recognize, is that that's where our cachet comes from. It isn't from the day-to-day things that we do. It's more in the service that we deliver to our clients and how well that service is executed. And you have to communicate that, as I say, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to run over my time. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic. And I think it just really goes to show how important that in particular topic is, to really toot your own horn and to speak up and to try new things and be able to say, hey, look what I did. This worked. This was successful. This benefited the organization as a whole, because you're understanding those organizational goals. And I think it kind of ties all of those responses down in together. So managing a successful fleet clearly requires both strategy with a nice sprinkle of creativity in there as well. What practices or innovations have you found to really be the most effective in managing a successful fleet today? Pete, what about you? What practices or innovations have you seen?
Oh, that's a great question. So at two different companies that I was involved in, we had a standard PM program where we would do preventive maintenance on vehicles on certain time frames or certain mileages. And what we learned was, and we actually hired some consultants from UPS to come help us. What we learned was that everybody was doing a PM different. And what we learned from UPS is they actually follow a route around the vehicle, and everybody in the whole organization is trained, and they all do it exactly the same. And we went out in 2 different companies and trained 800 mechanics in one and 600 mechanics in another on the proper way to do a PM, and got everybody to do it the exact same way. And it's amazing what you learn from that. And I mean, our PM times went down by 16%. I mean, our quality went up. I think just creating consistency in the organization is a really big deal. And I think you can generate higher quality vehicles and lower cost if you look for things to standardize. And I would start with your preventive maintenance program on how you execute it.
That's a great tip. Bob, what about you? What are some of the practices or innovations you found to be effective?
Yeah, I agree with Pete. Preventive maintenance has to be your core competency, and everything else starts from there. But without repeating what Pete said, in the public sector, in the year 2000, I won't go into the details, but we executed a contract with a local dealer, and that contract is in place today, 25 years later, and it has allowed this government to standardize their fleet. And they've also made it available to other governments in Florida. And I think you would all agree that standardizing your fleet with as minimal number of OEMs as possible is an efficiency, leads to a lot of efficiency, leads to a lot of cachet with warranty, et cetera. And it's really been a good program. And it has been implemented now. It's gone through 5 new cycles. And like I say, it's 25 years old. And I think that is one of the best things that we did in a fleet, is to allow that standardization, which is, like I say, is still in place today.
That's incredible that it's lasted and really stood the test of time right there. Glenn, what about you? What are some of the practices or innovations you found effective in managing your quite successful fleet?
Well, right now is capturing data to help you make your decisions, and understanding how the vehicles are being used. And I agree with everybody else that PM is very important, but the data will help you make adjustments and stuff to better service your vehicles. So the availability of data is something that's a real benefit in today's industry.
Definitely. And Matthew, what about you? What are some of the practice or innovations you found?
Well, you might not be surprised that I'm going to take a little bit different approach. I focused more on the word innovations in that question. And I've got 2, I guess, examples. One, when I was leading the EV program, one of the things we were able to do, I was fortunate to work for a company that had a lot of great resources available. One that was a little bit different was a change management group, which helped us. We had a specialist assigned to our team, and they helped us figure out who was going to be impacted by any change: mechanics, drivers, supervisors, cost centers. Anybody that might be impacted by putting EVs in the fleet, and then help us anticipate what their needs might be and what their reactions might be, and develop a really great program to make that change a little less painful for those people. And I think you can expand that even a little bit further to just be a focus on people in general, whether they are your internal customers, your drivers, your team members, making sure that they have the training that they need. Glenn mentioned how he started as a mechanic and then he moved up to a supervisor and then on to the fleet manager. And that's a very common progression in almost any industry. You're good at the job that you do, And so they promote you to be a supervisor, but not everybody thinks to give that person training that will help them be a successful supervisor or a successful manager. And as we think about that in fleet, that could be something as simple as I'm giving all of my telematics data to a supervisor and asking them to have a conversation with the driver to improve driver behavior, but they don't train the supervisor how to have that conversation. And so I just think focusing on people and their success will help us have more successful fleets as well.
That's amazing. We got a question in from our audience. I want to go ahead and throw this your way while we still have some time. So we've got a comment that's, thanking us for sharing experience, and they'd really love to know, in your view, is there a difference between truck drivers or fleet drivers today and in the past? For example, in terms of professionalism, ability to fix breakdowns in the field, their knowledge about the truck and inspections. What about the drivers in the fleets today? Are we seeing changes from 20 years ago up through today? Bob, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a fun question. Thank you for asking it. Most of us, if you look at our hair color or lack of hair, you'll know that we probably navigated the change from regular driver's licenses or chauffeur's licenses to CDLs in 1986. Drivers are definitely more professional today, more highly skilled, and more regulated than they ever were in the past. And that's becoming, that the elevation of regulations continues to evolve, which is all a good thing. Safety is so important and we haven't mentioned safety yet, but it's so important in our overall work that having safe drivers and drivers with high levels of skills, unfortunately, and for many companies, is not treated with the same level of interest as they may have in other employees, and it's kind of a shame. So yeah, drivers are much more relied upon today. They're much more professional, much more highly skilled. And I wish we had more and greater appreciation for them than is demonstrated by many companies.
Thanks, Bob. Matthew, love to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, I think along with the more professional, they're also in more demand. So no matter whether it's a pharmaceutical sales rep or a CDL, over the road truck driver, there's more demand for those drivers, and they can go wherever they want to go and get a job. And so having a focus on their needs, Bob mentioned safety, letting them know that we are there to make sure they get home safely at the end of every day is a really important task, and allows them to feel like they're more part of the team when oftentimes they're off in some distant area and not hanging around headquarters like your fleet team might be, right?
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So, I'm going to take a little bit. I have a little bit different view. I spend 30,000 miles in the last 2 years traveling around the country in my motorhome, and I spent a lot of time in truck stops. And so I see a lot of fleet drivers in truck stops, and I'm pretty amazed at who companies are hiring today. And it's frankly a little bit discouraging to see the level of fitness of some of the truck drivers. And I don't know if that's changed much out there in the industry over the last 30 years, but man, oh man, I think if I were a company and looking at the folks that I'm hiring, some of these guys got to get to a gym. I mean, it's unfortunate what you see in the health and wellness of some of the drivers out there today. And again, I'm not seeing a lot of out and back fleet drivers, PepsiCo drivers or, other company drivers. I'm seeing the long haul, over the road, sleeping in my truck kind of guys. And it's I think the industry, I think, is going to need to address it at some point.
It's fantastic feedback. Anybody else want to add anything onto that one? All right. Okay, we got a few minutes left. I've got a few questions we can still go through. Again, audience, if you got anything else, feel free to throw that out at us. Okay. As the saying goes, teamwork makes the dream work. We've talked a little bit about the concept of building a successful team through this conversation, but what strategies have you used to really build and lead a successful team over the years that you would be able to share? Matthew, what about you?
Well, it seems to be my my area of expertise today, or at least I'm getting a lot of those questions or taking that tact to answer. I think it's just being focused on people, right? Making sure that they get the education that they either want for their future career or that they need for the job. I saw a great example at Fleet Week last week. Schindler Elevator was named the Global Fleet Manager of the Year initially, but we had to change it to Fleet Team of the Year because Gibran from Schindler insisted that it was a team award, not an individual award. And he wanted to make sure his whole team was recognized. And I think that was part of a great strategy. And then just helping to mentor and train your team, even in areas that they might not realize they need help in. So you have to find a tactful way to bring it up, but to help them understand, what their strengths are and how to reinforce those strengths. But they might also have some weaknesses that they don't see. And you have to find a kind and tactful way to bring those up and give them the help they need to be a better manager.
I love it. Being a really true team leader in that approach, I think is very important. Glenn, what about you? What strategies have you used to really build and lead your team?
Well, I just try to. Well, I agree with what Matt said. It's not a I thing; it's a we thing. So I just try to make everybody feel like part of the wheel, and have them, sharing the responsibilities as well as the credits for all the successes. But just including everybody as instill that they're part of a team, not an individual. And like Matt says, offer them training so they can better themselves.
Pete, what about you? What strategies have you used to build your teams over the years?
We used to have a national meeting every year where we would bring in folks from all levels of the company, from mechanics to fleet managers, and we would have award ceremonies. We'd bring all our suppliers in, and we'd network. We'd have a trade show where we would network the fleet managers and the suppliers so that people could put faces with names, and it made people feel like they were part of something. And we would cut a lot of things during the year to save money, but having the national meeting was really high on everybody's priority list. And I mean, it turned into 1,100 people at points in time between suppliers and internal people. And so I think that level of team building was really important. And we really tried to build teams at the local level. And so I think it's that's just an example of some of the stuff we did.
No, that's fantastic. That's a huge group to be getting together for sure. A lot of challenges are going to go into that. Bob, what about you?
We talk more with our thumbs now than we do with our mouths. And that's really true when it comes to bringing young people into the organization. So I agree with Matt that you really need to communicate, recognize where the communication pitfalls are, and then encourage one-on-one, face-to-face, or group interaction so that people get used to having to talk to one another again. And one of the things that I have done in the past consistently is teach subordinate managers how to have a conflicting conversation, how to have that hard talk with someone in a way where you both walk out the door thinking that you've been a winner. And that's a skill that a lot of people don't possess. And nowadays, with communication becoming more and more digital as opposed to verbal one-on-one, et cetera, is so important. And so I continue to stress that skill, especially in governments where they don't possess that in many ways. So I think that for me, that's been a very important and a very successful element in my management style.
I love it. All right, we've got one more question that came in from the audience right now that I would actually love to see what you guys have some thoughts on. So what is your favorite or most recent leadership book that you have read? Are there any recommendations that have helped you guys kind of learn some new stuff, or something over the years that have kind of leaned you guys to where you're going? Matthew, what about you?
Well, I used to read a lot, so I hope I'm not getting them mixed up. This one wasn't as recent, but I really enjoyed the book Good to Great. And I believe it was in Good to Great. It sort of goes along with building a team, but they talk about getting the right people on the bus, then getting them in the right seat on the bus, and then deciding where you're going to go. And to me, that just makes a great suggestion for a team leader, to make sure you've got the right team, work with understanding, their strengths, and then figure out what's our agenda from here, given the strengths of the team.
That's a good one. That's a great answer. Thanks for submitting with that one. All right, guys, we've only got a couple minutes left. So I'm going to do a really quick rapid fire around everybody with one more question before we wrap things up. Right now, looking ahead, we've looked back a lot, but I would like to just take a quick minute and look ahead. The road is full of possibilities and challenges. In a real quick fire round, what trend or challenge do you really foresee for the future of fleet management that fleet managers really need to be preparing for and keeping an eye on now? Bob, what about you?
2027 federal emission regulations for diesel trucks. After the election, I don't know if that's still going to be a thing, but if it continues to be a thing, it's going to have a massive effect on our business. It's going to raise prices. It's going to make technicians' jobs even harder than they are now. And if you're not familiar with those, you really need to Google the information and educate yourself on what's coming, because it's major.
Thank you. Matthew.
Tying together a couple of things we already talked about. Safety, to me, has to be a key focus of every fleet, getting every driver home safely. I think we're doing a really good job at getting the data and having a good policy. Where we're not doing as good a job is where I'm spending a lot of time right now, and that is training those supervisors to be part of the chain as well, and getting the supervisors trained to have meaningful conversations with drivers so that the drivers will actually stop the risky behavior.
Thank you. Pete.
I continue to see electrification being a real challenge for the industry. And I think we haven't quite figured it out yet. And it's been that way for probably the last 4 years, and I can see it continuing for the next 5 years.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I can speak for everybody who's on the call. Glenn, did you have a challenge that you wanted to add in on that one for us? I didn't want to skip you on that one. I just looked over.
Well, for me, it's recruiting new mechanics, because I'm having people retire and such. So I've been having a difficult time in finding replacements. And like Bob said, the 2027 emissions worries me as well. Whether the people can work on the trucks, or, we have to depend on the dealerships to address all those small problems we have with the warning lights going off and such. So recruiting mechanics is still on top of my list.
Thank you, guys. Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you sent a question we didn't get to, we'll be following up via email. To everyone who joined us live, thank you for your time and engagement. And remember, this is just the beginning. Our Fleet Legends video series will continue to explore the wisdom that is shaping our industry. Be sure to catch the replay of this session and future episodes at worktruckonline.com/webinars. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.